Hello coaches, Connor here yet again with a little bit of, this time a movement breakdown. We're going to talk about the dumbbell push press, something that is in the alpha conditioning test out, and as a result something that I've had the chance to see a lot of coaches speak through. I want to celebrate a lot of common cues that are really effective and that are used by coaches in those submissions, and I also want to address if there's one major thing that I see coaches not necessarily getting wrong, but I think misunderstanding that will help then our ability to coach the push press and to do it ourselves if it's included in your training or when you're taking classes. So the dumbbell push press, let's just start 10,000 foot view. We're gonna take weights from the shoulder into an overhead position using the forceful dip and drive of the legs to help with moving the weight. I'll demonstrate a few repetitions. Right, so a couple of key points here. First one, feet hip width distance apart in the setup position. That is relevant because ultimately we want to be able to transfer as much force as possible vertically into the weights, and so hip width is our stance typically associated with power production. Next thing I want to talk to you about is the front rack position. Dumbbells, one head of the dumbbell physically resting on the shoulder with our elbows lifted such that triceps are about parallel with the floor. And one immediate common fault that you'll see fairly commonly is that athletes may look great in their first rep, but the issue is that they do a rep and their elbows drop. And they do another rep and their elbows drop. And they do another rep, and then before you know it, their elbows are so far down, if you can see, the dumbbell is now entirely out in front of my shoulder, which, because it's now off of my midline, is going to put that much more pressure either onto my core or if and when my core fails, onto my lower back. So we want to make sure dumbbells are one head of the dumbbell on the shoulder, elbows are lifted to help keep the weight as stacked over the middle of the body as possible from start to finish. Now, during the dynamic portion of the movement, the dip and drive, the biggest thing to think about here is that this dip and the drive is as vertical as possible. And that actually is the most common fault that I hear when coaches are explaining this movement pattern. This is not a squat. This is not a squat. If we think about what a squat is, the very first thing that happens is hips push backwards to initiate that movement. And as soon as my hips go backwards, assuming I haven't aggressively hyperextended my spine to keep my shoulder over my midfoot, my torso and my shoulders travel out in front of the middle of my body. And then because that has happened, everything we were just talking about, the trying to keep the weight stacked over middle of the body, middle of the foot, is violated. So now either athletes are going to be more inclined to punch the weight out in front of them, resulting in an improper overhead position, or they're gonna have to work against that vertical inclination of the torso and either wrench their way out of the dip and drive or end up overcompensating, sending the weights behind them and becoming hyperextended as a result. So again, during the dip and drive, think vertical torso, hips go straight down to the heels, close the hip, and then fire, open the hip to get the weights overhead. And when we are overhead, thinking about a strong, aligned overhead position. Straight line, my favorite way to cue this, from wrist to elbow to shoulder to hip to knee to heel. A couple things to watch out for here. Athletes might have soft knees, we want them flexed. Athletes might be loose in the glutes, we want them tight. Athletes might be overextended through the rib cage, we want ribs down, abs tight. And then if and when, after usually multiple repetitions, athletes in their overhead position start to get a little soft in their elbows, we want them to think constantly pressing up against the weight so that we have the benefit of a structured spine rather than any sort of energy leaks along the way. So again, dumbbell push press. Let's say I were just to coach this in a class and I'm not doing all this in-depth behind the scenes with my athletes. All right, everybody, dumbbell push press. We're gonna have one dumbbell in each hand, feet about hip width distance apart in your setup position. Elbows up in front of you. Try to stay as tall as you can. It's a vertical dip, only about 4 to 6 inches. And then a fast leg drive into the floor to help get the dumbbells up overhead. And when I say overhead, I mean straight overhead. Straight line, wrist, elbow, shoulder, hip, heel. Squeeze your abs, squeeze your quads, squeeze your butt. So we're nice and tight, nice and secure. If you got questions, come and find me. Let's give it a shot. And there you have it, dumbbell push press. If you got questions about this, please, please, please reach out to myself or any of the other master coaches, master trainers. I promise you we will not be upset about hearing from you, and we are always more than happy to help. Thank you kindly. We'll talk to you again soon.